Well, I just talked about it with the panel, so I want to remind you May 1st, next Tuesday, in the Mountain State, West Virginia, Fox News Channel will host a debate for the Republican Senate primary race. Co-moderators you see there, Bret Baier and Martha MacCallum, will be live in Morgantown, West Virginia. It's all part of a midterm election series right here on Fox.
The White House briefing set to get underway amid growing questions about the president's nominee for VA secretary. The White House defending Ronny Jackson as we learn more about misconduct allegations against him. Hello, everyone. I'm Dana Perino, and this is the Daily Briefing. Earlier on Capitol Hill, French President Emmanuel Macron addressing a joint meeting of Congress, calling for America to maintain its role as a global defender of democracy and human rights. Mike Emanuel is live on Capitol Hill. What more did the French president have to say on some of the critical issues facing the United States and France?
Dana, good afternoon. President Emmanuel Macron made reference to some of the immigration debate in this country, saying the United States cannot close itself off from the rest of the world.
Both in the United States and in Europe, we are living in a time of anger and fear because of these current global threats. But these feelings do not build anything.
Reaction was quite positive in the House chamber, with about 30 or so standing ovations overall in terms of the speech. Arizona Senator Jeff Flake told us he liked the speech.
Particularly the emphasis on multilateralism and responsibility of the United States to step up, and in particular with the rules that we've written with regard to the WTO or international institutions and organizations, that we ought to make sure that this liberal world order that we've helped create survives.
Some of the other hot topics: the Iran nuclear agreement and climate change in the French president's address to Congress. Dana?
And Mike, if I can't let you go without asking you about what lawmakers are saying about the nomination of Dr. Ronny Jackson to lead the VA.
Well, a number of senators we've talked to say they're trying to get to the truth about these allegations that have surfaced. So Dr. Ronny Jackson's nomination to be the VA secretary is on hold. The committee putting it on hold. A number of lawmakers say they want to basically figure out what is real and what may not be real. White House officials are expected to ask the relevant committee to reschedule Dr. Jackson's hearing. A top Republican says Dr. Jackson should be given a chance.
Well, everything I've seen that's come up, obviously probably isn't helpful to his cause. But he deserves his day in court. He wants his day in court. I assume that the committee will give him that.
The White House was quick to point out the glowing praise Dr. Jackson received from President Barack Obama. Dana?
And the president I worked for, President George W. Bush, liked him too.
Yes.
All right. Thank you, Mike, very much.
Thank you.
And there's more reaction to the Jackson nomination from Capitol Hill and the White House.
I have not talked to members of the committee because we haven't convened. I've talked to them individually. For the most part, they're doing the same thing I am and just trying to figure out where the truth is.
We all look at allegations, but I think you have to question, if there's a process within the Department of Defense for active military people to bring those concerns as to why would they bring allegations to the ranking member of the Veteran Affairs Committee if it wasn't politically motivated.
Joining me now is Tennessee Senator Bob Corker. It's good to have you with us. We just showed a little clip of Senator John Thune. Another thing that he said today is that Republican senators their patience is wearing thin, dealing with nominees, trying to get them through this process because it takes up a lot of time. But does it also feel like the evidence against Dr. Ronny Jackson is a little thin as well?
Yeah, Dana, look, the committee will do its work. Johnny Isakson is a great chairman. John Tester, a great ranking member. They'll figure out what is and isn't, and when they do, then we'll deal with it. So most of us are not focused on it.
Do you think that the hearing could be rescheduled by next week?
Again, I just don't know. We're on recess next week, so it would likely be the week after. But most of us have a lot of faith in the chairman to deal with this, and when it comes to us, we'll dig in on these issues.
Well, on an issue that is in your jurisdiction on your committee, I wanted to ask you about the Iran deal because there was the meeting that the president had with Emmanuel Macron yesterday, then the speech today. Do you have a sense of whether our position is changing heading into May 12th? Are we looking for a new deal?
You know, I talked to Macron. I met him today, obviously, but I talked to his advisor about the meat discussed here. And so, Dana, it's still hard for me to tell whether they're willing to deal with the sunset provision, which is the president's greatest concern, and that is after 10 years, Iran is off and running. So I still think it's a little fuzzy. Merkel will be coming in very shortly before the May 12th decision, and maybe it can be tightened up some, but it's really difficult, Dana, to see if we've made progress on the most important issue, which is the sunset provisions themselves.
And is that something that you think that the allies could work together on? That I know Iran is being quite belligerent today, but might they be willing to swallow that?
I hope so. They're willing to deal with ballistic testing. They're willing to deal with inspections. I'm talking about our European partners. This one sunset provision, especially Germany, has been pushing back on, feeling like they believe that it negates the deal or changes the deal too much. I know it's the one that the president, again, is focused on most, so we'll see. I've long thought unless something changes, he will pull out. I mean, I've had multiple one-on-one meetings with the president on this topic, but it looks to me like the Europeans realize that and may be willing to make changes. We'll see.
On another issue, well, a broader issue. So as Mike Emanuel just reported, apparently Macron got 30 standing ovations at the joint session. Here's a soundbite from it. I wanted to get your take on it because it sounded quite, I don't know, from an age before our recent politics. Watch.
All right.
Personally, if you ask me, I do not share the fascination for new strong powers, the abandonment of freedom, and the illusion of nationalism.
What do you think he was trying to get across there?
Well, I think he was sort of prodding, the executive branch towards being a little bit more involved in the world. And but I thought it was a great speech. Okay, and I think this whole period of time between the French president and President Trump has been, I think it's been great. I thought both their speeches yesterday were aspirational out on the lawn. I thought it was a great moment for us. He did a great job today, but he was gently prodding the executive branch towards more multilateral efforts, and I thought he did it in a good way.
Well, it's always fun when your friends come to visit, and certainly the people of France are friends. I wanted to, before I let you go, I was in Nashville for a couple of days. Had a chance yesterday. It was wonderful. Did a charity event last night with Kevin Carter. But I did get to interview Governor Haslam yesterday. I was in your state capital. And I know that you don't have to worry about this so much, but there is new polling out from the Mason-Dixon Polling and Strategy Organization. Phil Bredesen, the candidate, the Democrat running against Marsha Blackburn to replace you, now leading 46-43 in this latest poll. There had been about a 10-point lead in the most recent poll from Middle Tennessee State University. Do you think that this race will actually be quite close?
I think it'll ultimately be close. As you know, I'm supporting Marsha Blackburn and have sent her the maximum check and plan to vote for her. I also know Governor Bredesen well. I served with him when he was mayor and I was commissioner of finance, and then when I was a senator, he was governor. And I was mayor. I mean, we've had a lot of overlap, and people know him around our state. So look, I think it's going to be a close race, and yet at the end of the day, we are a red state, and people are going to be thinking about her first vote, which will be a vote for Mitch McConnell versus the first vote that Phil Bredesen will be making. So I think that at the end could make a difference, but no doubt it's going to be a close race.
Well, it was fun to be there, and I can see why you want to head home after the end of this year in your service. Thank you, Senator Bob Corker.
Hey, it's been a great privilege to do what I do, but I do look forward to going home. Thank you so much. Okay.
All right, thank you. Now let's bring in Fox News politics editor, who also writes the fabulous halftime report, Chris Stirewalt. I just mentioned the Tennessee race. We've had the election yesterday in Arizona. I also wanted, maybe I could go to this first with you and ask about the West Virginia Senate race, because there was some new Fox News polling yesterday, and I know that Martha and Brett are getting ready for that first debate next Tuesday. And since it's in the state from which you hail, I would wonder what you think about everything.
Well, it is only fitting that the Fox News Channel begin its sojourn across the United States doing primary debates in the great state of West Virginia, the 35th state, the Mountain State, and now we've got entrants. We have our participants, Congressman Evan Jenkins, Former coal executive Don Blankenship and State Attorney General Patrick Morrisey will be on our stage on Tuesday in Morgantown, West Virginia. And the poll tells us that this is anybody's race, that this is very fluid, and that there is a substantial undecided. And which one of these guys is the best choice to take on Joe Manchin in what is substantially probably one of the 4 most vulnerable Democratic seats right now, that represents one of the 4 best opportunities for Republicans to actually get a pickup in the Senate in a tough year. This is enormously consequential, and we love being part of it. It's super cool.
So the Republicans have a pretty tough primary, right? Several people running. You'll have 3 people on stage next week. One of them is Don Blankenship. You mentioned he works in the coal industry. In the New York Times today, they wrote about him that Don Blankenship is running for the United States Senate as a proud West Virginian with an Appalachian roots. But his primary residence is a $2.4 million villa with palm trees and an infinity pool near Las Vegas. You think his opponents will bring that up?
Probably a little bit. Probably a little bit. This race has been very sharp-elbowed, very rough. Blankenship's biggest exposure here, of course, is he was imprisoned. He was convicted of federal violations on mine safety and health stuff and a conspiracy charge, and spent a year in prison. He says that this is evidence that he was a victim of Obama and deep state, et cetera, et cetera. He tries to turn it into a positive. Now you see Mitch McConnell, and it's hard to tell exactly which way that the sort of Senate establishment is pulling in this race, but one would guess that Congressman Evan Jenkins is the chalk there, that the attacks are coming fast and furious on Blankenship now. We've seen his poll numbers probably erode a little bit. The debate represents his probably best chance to reset the race, get back in the lead, and get back ahead of Jenkins.
Just before I let you go, and they want me to wrap, but is it possible that the Republicans will tear each other apart so much that it actually helps Joe Manchin, the Democrat, with his reelection effort?
It's already happening. That is already happening. And Manchin remains very popular in the state. He's a Democrat, which is not popular, but his personal popularity, personal favorability remains considerable.
All right, Chris Starr. Well, it's good to be back in the saddle with you. Thank you so much.
Good to have you back.
And Fox News will be in West Virginia to host a debate between the Republican Senate candidates this Tuesday, May 1st. It will be moderated by anchors Bret Baier and Martha MacCallum, so be sure to tune into that. A live look at the White House briefing room will take you there as soon as Sarah Sanders steps to the podium. Plus,
I'm just really thankful that I won. Would it be nice if I had won by more? Of course. But a win is a win, and I'm the next Congresswoman for Congressional District 8, and that's awesome.
Plus a win for the GOP in a special House election in Arizona. But what does this very close race signal as we head toward the November midterms? Republicans breathing a sigh of relief after narrowly winning a special congressional election in Arizona yesterday. Debbie Lesko claimed victory in the district Donald Trump easily carried by 21 points. However, Lesko won the race by only 5 points. I'm joined now by Bruce Mehlman, a former Assistant Secretary of Commerce for Technology Policy, and somebody I turn to talk to me about putting this in context. Debbie Lesko in the previous segment, she's right, a win is a win. And she won by over 5 points. As would in any other sort of close race, that would be considered remarkable. But do the Republicans have a reason to be a little worried?
I think Republicans have a reason to be a lot worried. As a Republican, I'm a lot worried. Lesko deserves credit for winning, but she didn't beat the spread. In the last 9 special elections, if you compare the margin of victory to the expected based upon the partisan nature of the districts, we've underperformed the spread by an average of 17.
Actually, I think we have something from David Wasserman who showed that the number of races where these special elections where Democrats have overperformed, if you can look there, we have a tweet from him, that he says that you really need an average of overperformance of 4%. And if you look at across all those races, they're all above 4, sometimes well above 4.
Yes, it is one of the many dead canaries at this point.
Dead canary. You have a graphic that you put together. You call it the blue wave. And what I wondered is, there's speculation today. Axios led with it this morning, and I couldn't tell if it was just a scare tactic. Do the Republican senators have any reason to be worried?
Well, you always have a reason to be worried if you're up for re-election, and if your party holds the White House, you have a significant reason to be worried. That said, As the graphic shows, the map is extraordinarily favorable to Republicans. There are only 9 Republican states that are in play, or that are up this cycle, and only one of them, Nevada, was won by Hillary Clinton. By contrast, Democrats are defending 26, 10 of which went for President Trump.
Now, Josh Kraushaar, who we all know from National Journal, Hotline Josh, you can follow him on Twitter. He writes a column twice a week. This was great. He said that Democrats will soon find out that to win elections in the many competitive GOP-leaning states and districts across the country, message matters a lot more than money and sounding like a card-carrying member of the anti-Trump resistance outside the liberal coast. It isn't a smart strategy. Last week, we had Meredith Kelly from the DCCC here. She's the communications director. And she wanted to highlight 5 candidates. And I look at 4 of the 5, and they're veterans. They're moderate Democrats. These are people that are not actually the progressive wing of the party.
No, you're exactly right. And a huge challenge the Democrats face as they go through a civil war is the energy, and a lot of the money is on the progressive left, the Bernie Sanders, the Elizabeth Warren side of the party. But if you're going to win in North Dakota, if you're going to win in Indiana, you need folks who say they'll work with the president that those states voted for.
Do you think that that Democrats or Republicans understand that the candidates need to run in their district, localize the race, and not try to be everything to all people when it comes to national politics?
You know, some seem to get that and some don't. Usually what you find is the people who miss the message and think they're running for national office lose. And the folks who get, Rob Portman's a great example in 2016. He ran the best race, I think, in the Senate, focused entirely on the issues that mattered to Ohio and Ohio voter issues from opioids to trade, and he won handily. Because he ran a smart race.
All right. Well, Bruce Mehlman, it's always a pleasure to have you, especially in studio. And we were awaiting Sarah Sanders, and guess what? She's here.
Administration was a tremendous success, and the First Lady in particular deserves a lot of the credit. Her attention to every detail and full engagement in the planning helped highlight and showcase the special relationship between the United States and France, our oldest ally. President Trump and President Macron also had a number of important conversations on critical issues facing each nation at home and abroad. As the president said yesterday, the future between the United States and France has never looked brighter. Tomorrow, the administration will be participating in the 25th anniversary of Take Our Daughters and Sons to Work Day. The president looks forward to welcoming many of your children and the children of those who work here at the White House. As a reminder, this Saturday is National Prescription Take Back Day. Across the country, many businesses, medical offices, state, local, and tribal governments and first responders will host drop-off events where Americans can safely dispose of unused medication. Disposing of unused pills can prevent the misuse of commonly prescribed opioids. During the last National Take Back Day in October, Americans disposed of a record-breaking 900,000 pounds of prescription pills. The Trump administration encourages everyone to take part. We can all be part of the solution. For more details on that, I encourage you to visit takebackday.dea.gov to find your local collection site and learn more about how to safely dispose of prescription medication. And with that, I'll take your questions. John.
I asked the president yesterday about the allegations that Dr. Ronny Jackson is facing. There have been more allegations that have been leveled at him in the last 24 hours, one of which might involve a HIPAA violation or an alleged HIPAA violation. Do you have anything more on the allegations against Jackson? Is the White House saying anything about it?
Yeah, Dr. Jackson's record as a White House physician has been impeccable. In fact, because Dr. Jackson has worked within arm's reach of 3 presidents, he has received more vetting than most nominees. Given his unique position of trust and responsibility, Dr. Jackson's background and character were evaluated during 3 different administrations. Dr. Jackson has had at least 4 independent background investigations conducted during his time at the White House, including an FBI investigation conducted as part of the standard nomination vetting process. During each of those investigations, Dr. Jackson received unanimous praise from dozens of witnesses, and the investigations revealed no areas of concern. Dr. Jackson has received glowing evaluations from his superiors, including several from President Obama, which said, such as Dr. Jackson should continue to promote ahead of his peers and already at a level of performance and responsibility that exceeds his current rank.
But what about some of these allegations about overpaying prescribing the other one that I just mentioned a moment ago?
I think that makes it pretty clear in terms of very thorough investigation and vetting process has taken place. None of those things that come up, we're continuing to look at anything beyond that. Darlene?
Despite what you just said there, is the White House doing any sort of additional looking into Dr. Jackson's background in light of all of the allegations?
There's been, again, a pretty thorough vetting process done by the FBI as well as 3 other independent investigations, but that's part of what the nomination process of Congress should do and what it's supposed to look like and why they should move forward with a hearing.
And since the White House and the President are standing behind him, will you ask the Senate Veterans Committee to reschedule his confirmation hearing?
We're continuing to work with members on the Hill. Major.
I've got one on this and a couple on foreign policy. So is it the position of the administration that the people who have raised these allegations are lying?
That's not what I said. I said we've done and multiple background checks have taken place, and we're continuing to look at the
Do
situation.
you not find them credible, in other words? These
Again,
allegations? And do you think there's
these are
anything
new.
that
I can only
suggests
speak
political
to.
motivation behind them?
I can only speak to some of the personal accounts that those of us have, as well as the records that we have that are substantiated through a very detailed and thorough background investigation process.
So on North Korea, during the State of the Union address, the President described the North Korean regime as one that shamefully tried an American, Otto Warmbier, sent him back to the country nearly dead, starves its own people, and is a dictatorship worse than almost any other. That's what he said in the State of the Union. How could that also be true if Kim Jong-un is honorable and open? How do you reconcile those two assessments of the leader and the regime in North Korea?
The President's referencing the conversations that we've had ongoing over the last month or so in regards to the meeting to take place and their willingness to denuclearize on the peninsula, and that's what
changed his appraisal of Kim Jong-un?
Certainly not that, but he is wants to have the ability to sit down and have these conversations. And in that process, they have been open with their willingness to denuclearize, and that's certainly been the focus and what we have been pushing for and expect to happen.
He thinks the regime is changing.
I'm sorry?
He thinks the regime is changing.
We think that the maximum pressure campaign is working, but again, we're not going to let up on that campaign until we see some of the words that they've made go into concrete action, but they're moving in the right direction. John?
Thanks a lot, Sarah. I wanted to get your reaction to the ruling that came down from a federal district court judge here in Washington concerning DACA. He said that the president's decision to end DACA was arbitrary and capricious. What's your reaction to this ruling, the third federal judge to rule against the president on DACA?
The DACA program violates federal law. President Obama went around Congress and created the illegal DACA program. We believe the judge's ruling is extraordinarily broad and wrong on the law. What's worse is that it creates an incentive for more illegal immigrant youth to come here and causes them to expect similar judicial policies be applied to them. This ruling is good news for smuggling organizations and criminal networks and horrible news for our national security. It's time for Congress to do what the president has called on them to do and offered to be part of and actually fix this problem.
Is it still the main argument by the administration that the reason why it was necessary to cut off the DACA program was because of the threat of lawsuits by Republican attorneys general?
That was certainly a big part of us knowing that this is an illegal program and something that Congress has the ability to actually create laws, and they're the ones that have to be part of this process and fix this problem. Steve?
Yes, Sarah, I'd like to ask you about the drop in the ranking for the United States in the World Press Freedom Index. The United States now down to 45, and according to Reporters Without Borders, much of the blame for that goes to the president for his attacks on the media. What's the reaction of the White House, and does it accept that the president's comments has denigrate the freedom of the press in the United States?
Certainly would reject the idea that the president or this administration has halted freedom of the press. I think we're one of the most accessible administrations that we've seen in decades. I think by my mere presence of standing up here and taking your questions unvetted is a pretty good example of freedom of the press, and I think it's ridiculous to suggest otherwise. John?
Thank you, Sarah. Two questions, one on President Macron's visit and the other on foreign policy. Yesterday, there was some scuttlebutt late in the afternoon that no Democrats were invited to the dinner last night. And then later, a check of the list showed that there were at least 4 Democrats invited. However, the accurate report was there were no congressional Democrats invited. Now, going back to state dinners to when President Roosevelt hosted the King and Queen of England in 1939 and invited potential opponents, there have always been congressional Democrats at state dinners. Why the exception last night?
Again, as you said, there were Democrats present at the dinner, and the focus of this dinner was to keep it intimate and small, and that's exactly what we did. There was a wide range of individuals that participated, and we think it was a great success, and very proud of not just the dinner, but the entire visit, and certainly the relationship that we have with our great ally in France.
And no congressional Democrats. Was there any discussion of that in preparing the list?
Look, we talk with congressional Democrats all the time. We don't have to have dinner with them to have conversations with them. We'll continue to talk with them about policy-related issues. And again, I think that the fact that there were a number of Democrats that were present kind of negates the fact that it wasn't a bipartisan dinner. Charlie? Oh, sorry.
The proclamation the president signed regarding Armenia and Turkey. He used the word Medzhekern, which is Armenian for catastrophe or atrocity, but he never used the word genocide in this resolution. Does the president believe in Armenian genocide?
I haven't had a detailed conversation with him about that, but I understand that the resolution the president signed was consistent with past administrations as well. Charlie?
Thank you, Sarah. Rap superstar Kanye West has been in the news lately for supporting the president and expressing his admiration for the president.
Covering all range of topics.
Right. I'm curious whether the president has reached out to Kanye West and whether he'd be willing to meet with him at the White House.
I don't know of any conversation that they've had over the last week or so. I'll keep you posted if that changes anytime. Matthew? 2 weeks ago. Sorry, I know they met during the transition. That's the only meeting I'm aware of that's taken place or conversation. Before everybody has a meltdown and thinks that we had a meeting last week. Yeah.
In today's Supreme Court arguments about the travel ban, there was much discussion of the president's proposal during the campaign that all Muslims be barred from entering the U.S., and it was noted during those arguments that the president has never actually disavowed that proposal, and it was also noted that he had not made those comments since being sworn in as president. So I wanted to ask, does the White House disavow that campaign proposal, or does it stand by it?
The administration's top priority is to ensure the safety and security of the American people. For that reason, the administration has put in place enhanced global security measures to improve screening and vetting capabilities and share information. It's working. There has been significant improvements in identity management and information sharing with foreign governments. Because of this, our international partners have raised their own baseline requirements. Without the ability to impose entry restrictions, the United States may be forced to unsuspectingly allow dangerous criminals or terrorists into the country. Additionally, without the restrictions, foreign governments have little incentive to improve their information sharing and identity management practices. The focus of this travel ban has been on safety and security, is limited to a small number of countries, and a lot of Muslim-majority countries have the same abilities to travel to and from the United States as they did in previous administrations. I think that alone in action answers your question clearly. Jim?
I just wanted to follow up on Dr. Ronny Jackson. Yesterday, the president suggested that Dr. Jackson does not have the experience to run the Department of Veterans Affairs. Is that a fair assessment? That he lacks that experience?
That's not what the president said. I think you're taking some of his words out of context. And
said-
based on
said
your tweet
experience
today,
is
I
an
know you
issue.
don't appreciate when people take your words out of context. So I'd appreciate if you not do that to the president. If he didn't think he had the experience, he wouldn't have nominated. He said that that had been one of the questions that people had posed about him. Obviously, the president thought.
Jackson has all the experience necessary to run the department.
Look, I think he has an incredibly
yes or no
strong
question.
background. He's a highly qualified, highly skilled individual, and if he didn't think he was capable of doing the job, he wouldn't have announced his nomination in the first place.
Follow up if I can. Just since you brought up being taken out of context, it seems to be a press-related question. Are you trying to say that this administration is a champion of a free press?
I
That seems.
certainly think that, as I stated a moment ago, we support a free press, but we also support a fair press. And I think that those things should go hand in hand, and there's a certain responsibility by the press to report accurate information. I think a number of people.
responsibility on
I'm
the
not
part of the
finished.
president?
I think a number of people in this room do that every single day. They do their very best to provide fair and accurate information. Certainly support that. That's one of the reasons I'm standing here taking your questions. And a lot of times taking your questions in a tone that's completely unnecessary, unneeded, and frankly doesn't help further the conversation or help the American people get any more information in a better way, which is your job and my job, and that's what I'm trying to do. I'm going to move on. David, go ahead.
The president's tone
Jim,
towards
I'm
the press.
finished. Thank you.
The president's tone towards the press obviously is not helpful at times,
you,
and I think
Jim.
that that's plain to see.
A
David, go
Navy
ahead.
inspector general had problems with the way Jackson ran his medical office, which only has 50 people in it. What makes him qualified to run a big department that has 350,000 people in it?
Look, I saw a number of members of both the House and Senate do interviews today, just earlier this morning, in which they said, look, we've tried this a number of other ways with people who have run massive organizations and it hasn't worked out very well. This is a different approach, but it certainly doesn't mean it's a wrong approach or that he's not qualified. This is somebody who's been on the battlefields, made decisions at a very high stress level, and saved a number of individuals' lives in some of the most trying circumstances. Somebody that understands the relationship between veterans and the needs and the care that they have as a veteran himself or as a service member himself, and somebody who has a relationship and a deep-rooted care and concern for those individuals that may be far and above what we've seen from previous administrators that have overseen that agency. He's a highly qualified individual, and we're going to continue looking at this and continue moving forward. Julie.
Can you, are you telling us that the White House was not aware of any of the allegations before the president decided to name Dr. Jackson, just first of all to clarify?
I'm telling you that none of those things have come up in the 4 separate background investigations that have taken place. There's been no area of concern that was raised for Dr. Jackson specifically.
Can you describe to us then what the vetting process was at the White House before he was named, given that, as David just mentioned, there is an Inspector General report and there have been allegations in the past that are now coming to light, but they existed before the president chose him?
Again, Dr. Jackson has undergone 4 separate background checks, one that was conducted by the FBI, and all of those revealed nothing and came back with a clean recommendation.
The only vetting that was done of him as a nominee was to look at his past background checks, is what you're telling us?
No, I mean, there's a number of things, but you also have to remember this is somebody that spends more time with the president than just about anyone. These investigations are very thorough and certainly something that was taken into consideration. Blake.
Thank you. Let me ask you a couple questions about the Tim Cook meeting that is either wrapped or going on right now. Do you by chance have a readout of what exactly took place that the president promised to
The
land?
meeting was still ongoing when the briefing started. I know that the primary focus and purpose of the meeting is to discuss trade, something that's been on the president's schedule for the last couple of weeks. If we have any additional information, we'll let you know.
Let me ask you, in the last month now, the president has met with Bill Gates, who is the second wealthiest individual in the world. Now he's meeting with Tim Cook, who runs the largest company in the United States. Does the president have any intentions at any point to meet with the wealthiest individual in the world, Jeff Bezos? And if so, under what conditions would that be?
I'm not aware of that being on the schedule. I certainly haven't seen it on any of the look-aheads. I think the president would be open to it, but I'm not aware of anything being locked in at this point. Ashley?
Sarah, Scott Pruitt lived for below market rent in a Capitol Hill row house owned by an energy industry lobbyist. He reportedly directed staff to give raises to top aides and then obfuscated about it. He spent over $150,000 of taxpayer dollars on first-class travel. And he reportedly once even tried to get his security detail to use their sirens so he could get to a reservation at Le Diplomat, among other alleged ethical lapses. I know you said yesterday you were looking at reports about him, but can you sort of explain why he still has a job in the president's cabinet, and also how his behavior is in keeping with the values of draining the swamp?
Again, we're evaluating these concerns, and we expect the EPA administrator to answer for them, and we'll keep you posted. Aisha.
Thanks. Just to follow up on that, when you say you expect the administrator Pruitt to answer for these accusations, where do you expect that to happen? Like, are you looking for this in hearings? Is the White House asking him questions?
We're having ongoing conversations.
And also, just to follow up on Jackson, when you say that he's been through 4 background checks, can you say, but these allegations have now come up, and some of them are very serious. Is the White House going to look into the allegations that have been made against him about drinking on the job? And
certainly something that we would look at, absolutely.
Okay.
Sarah. Take one last question, Francesca.
Thank you, Sarah. I wanted to clarify, too, about these 4 background checks. Were any of these background checks since President Trump took office or since he was named as the nominee for VA Secretary? And has the White House ever been informed of allegations like these, like excessively drinking on the job or passing out medication like candy, as it were, since he was the physician for President Trump?
I'm not aware of any of those allegations being made until the nomination was made.
And to follow up on what I was asking about the background check, when was his most recent background check?
I'd have to look at the specific date, but my understanding is that a new one took place at the time of the new administration. Thanks so much, guys. See you tomorrow.
Sarah acknowledged the heroism of James Shaw.
All right, now let's bring back Fox News Politics editor Chris Starwell for a quick discussion about that briefing. Number 1 on the agenda for the reporters was Dr. Ronny Jackson, the president's personal physician, who he nominated to be VA secretary, who's come under some anonymous allegations, but enough that the hearing that he was supposed to have on the Senate side was kicked, possibly, well, it's not rescheduled yet. And I just wonder what you think about the White House having to deal with this kind of a story when they would love to be talking about something else.
You know, I always wonder, Republicans complain always about unfair press coverage. So I'm not sympathetic when they're not prepared for it. They were trying something, they are still trying something that was quite a long bomb. This was quite, you could almost call it a Hail Mary, to say, you know what, we're going to do something completely different when it comes to Veterans Affairs. We're not going to take some corporate guy, we're not going to take some government guy, we're going to take a doctor. We're going to put a physician in charge. He's a guy the president likes, he believes in him. This was an improbable selection, to say the least. That they would undertake a selection like that, subject Dr. Jackson to this, and not be ready is beyond, it is totally inexplicable that they couldn't have seen that there would be additional scrutiny on a nominee like this, and that they are not ready for it. Is when I talked to Republicans on the Hill, I talked to senior staffers about this just yesterday, and they threw their hands up. They said, how can we help the administration if the administration's not helping itself?
Well, I guess one thing that they do believe is maybe that these allegations are either far-fetched and that he wants a chance to explain himself, which he may get. But also tomorrow, the EPA Administrator Scott Pruitt will be in the House. He'll be having some oversight hearings from House Energy and Commerce Committee in the morning, and then in the afternoon with House of Probes. And you heard a question there from the reporter saying, given all the issues that are swirling around Scott Pruitt, do you still have confidence in him? And of course, the White House sticking by him as well.
Sticking by him-ish. Saying,
yeah, she did say we're looking into it.
ish.
Yeah.
They're investigating, they're looking into, look, there is serious frustration. I'll put it this way. The very best thing that Scott Pruitt has going for him is that Republicans are terrified they wouldn't be able to get 51 votes to get a replacement EPA administrator in. And that may be the only thing right now that is keeping Scott Pruitt in the job, is that Republicans in Congress are afraid that if they push too hard to get him out, that they'll be left with nobody in the position and no way to keep the administration's policy going forward.
Well, we'll bring everybody an update tomorrow after that. After he has his hearing, we'll let people know how he does there. Chris Stirewalt, thank you.
You bet.
The Supreme Court hearing arguments on the president's controversial travel ban, the questions justices were asking, and what that tells us about how they could rule. Fox News alert: the Supreme Court taking on President Trump's controversial travel ban, hearing arguments challenging the third version of the policy, which critics contend violates the Constitution and discriminates based on religion. Our good friend Shannon Bream is live at the Supreme Court. Shannon, it's not raining anymore, so it must be a better day.
You know what? It has cleared up a little bit, but I got to tell you, it has been a very passionate day today. The final day of arguments for this entire term. They saved the toughest, most controversial case a lot of people would argue for last. Now, first up was this discussion about who has the power here, Congress or the president, when it comes to vetting and immigration. The administration says this third version of the travel ban is narrowly tailored. It's all about national security, but Justice Sotomayor had questions about where the president derives his authority, where Congress has already acted. Here's part of what she said.
What I see the president doing here is saying, I'm going to add more to the limits that Congress set.
Right.
And to what Congress said was enough. Where does a president get the authority to do more than Congress has already decided is adequate?
Now, the big issue, the president's campaign statements and tweets about Muslim immigrants today, a lot of discussion about whether those should be considered when they look at the text of this travel ban itself. Well, you know, North Korea and Venezuela are added to this latest travel ban version. Those obviously are not Muslim populated, majority Muslim countries. So Justice Alito asked a question about that, saying, listen, if this is supposed to be a so-called Muslim ban, it's not very effective. Here's what he said.
I think there are 50 predominantly Muslim countries in the world. Five countries, 5 predominantly Muslim countries are on this list. The population of the predominantly Muslim countries on this list make up about 8% of the world's Muslim population.
So the court seemed pretty evenly divided, but Justice Kennedy, often the swing vote, had tough questions for both sides. So now we wait. The decision is due by the end of June, Dana.
Well, it's certainly good to see you in the daylight, but everybody here should watch her at 11 p.m. Eastern. Fox News at Night is a great show. Thank you, Shannon.
Thanks. See you then.
All right, now with James Trusty, former Justice Department prosecutor, for a little bit more on this, an analysis of it. Tell me what you think about what you heard Shannon describe that the justices were asking about, and does it have anything to do you think, that they'll come down looking at what the president said during the campaign versus what he did as president?
Right. I think Shannon touched the two big issues for this litigation. One is really just a very kind of technical, difficult argument about congressional powers versus presidential powers.
Yeah.
Obviously, Sotomayor was interested in that. But there's a lot of talk about the use of President Trump's tweets and interviews. And that's what I think concerns me in terms of how this thing plays out. I think that's a very dangerous precedent to start taking campaign promises and campaign comments or interviews and assuming it's gospel. I mean, the American public doesn't assume it's gospel when they hear a politician on the trail. But the Supreme Court and some of the lesser courts that have dealt with this issue seem to have at least some predilection, or at least some components of the Supreme Court are interested in those types of comments and using them as exhibits, as evidence in this hearing.
And to the question that Sotomayor was asking about where does the president derive his power, isn't that fairly clear, or is there any precedent that we could look to that says, well, the Supreme Court's already ruled on this?
Well, there's case law that goes back, I think, probably 60 or 70 years dealing with presidential authority and kind of preemption in the world of enforcing immigration law. And there's the Immigration and Naturalization Act that comes into play here also. But it's not slam dunk. I mean, there's very legitimate issues here as to whether or not Congress is actually the intended leader when it comes to immigration enforcement.
There was also today a lower court ruling about the DACA program, in which a lower court said that the president needs to reinstate it and start accepting more applicants to that program. But you think that this decision was not the clear victory that some DACA supporters think it is?
Yeah, it's really kind of maddening to hear both sides on this right now, because the DACA supporters are saying that Judge Bates has, landed a haymaker on the administration, telling them that this program is going to be, the law of the land. I don't think the opinion says that. It's a 60-page opinion, so maybe some folks should invest the time in reading it. Conversely, at the press conference just now, we heard the press secretary blast away like the judge loves terrorists for this ruling. The reality is it's a very limited judicial ruling that says, give me better excuses for why you are abandoning DACA.
Right.
If you do so within 90 days, you may succeed.
Yeah, the government gets a chance to rebrief. All right, James Trusty, thanks for explaining all of that to us. We appreciate it.
Sure.
When it comes to Syria, does the military need and deserve clear, concrete objectives that are measurable and dictate whether we have success? My next guest, a former Marine sniper, will explain what he thinks next. Just in, former President George H.W. Bush is on the mend. According to a statement from his office, the former president has been moved from the intensive care unit at a hospital in Houston to a regular patient room. He's expected to continue his recovery there. The 93-year-old former president was hospitalized after contracting a blood infection, and we're glad to hear he's better. President Trump might be having second thoughts about withdrawing troops from Syria after meeting with French President Macron. The president yesterday said he wants to leave a strong and lasting footprint in Syria before bringing our troops home. Jake Wood served in both Iraq and Afghanistan and is the co-founder and chief executive officer of Team Rubicon. Let me ask you about Syria first. Obviously, you served in both wars, and did you feel that now the mission in Syria is not exactly clear? And do we need more clarity for our men and women on the ground?
I think clarity is one of the most important things that we can provide our troops. I mean, certainly they need the right equipment, they need water, they need food, they need, beans, bullets, Band-Aids, they call it in the Marine Corps. But clarity of mission, clarity of intent is critical. I think at times over the last 17 years, there's been a lack of clarity. What are the objectives that they're fighting towards, and what do they need to execute them? Ultimately, what's it look like at the end? I mean, what does success look like?
Yeah, when the president said that yesterday, that he wanted to leave a lasting footprint, I wasn't exactly sure what he meant by that.
And I don't think anybody does. And I think it starts with really clarifying for not just the troops, but the American people. Right. What is our goal? What is America's place in the world? I think at times this president has gone back and forth on who we want to be on the international stage. And then, certainly that trickles down through the Pentagon and ultimately to the troops on the ground.
Yeah. I do want to talk about Team Rubicon because you're doing some amazing work all across. Tell me a little bit about Houston, since I just got back from there.
Yeah, so obviously Houston was devastated by Hurricane Harvey last year in 2017. Team Rubicon, we're a nonprofit organization, and what we do is we train, recruit, train, and deploy military veterans to respond to disasters, both here in the U.S. and around the world. We put about 2,000 volunteers on the ground in the greater Gulf Coast area after the storm, helped about 1,000 homes. The recovery is not over. Situations in Houston and Puerto Rico and even in Florida, they're ongoing. We have too many families that are living under blue tarps instead of permanent roofs. People's lives have been financially destroyed, and there's, the American people need to step up, and local governments, the federal government needs to do what's right to make sure that these people can survive and thrive.
And you've done work in Guatemala as well. We only have 30 seconds left, but I did want to say that it was really impressive what you've done, giving of yourselves and also giving some purpose to veterans to get out there and help. And you're right, we all should do more in order to help. All right, Jake Wood of Team Rubicon, thank you so much. All right, that's been a busy day. I'm back from all of those travels. I'll be here tomorrow as well. I'm Dana Perino, and Shep is up after the break.